All right. Well, why don't we get started? Hello, everybody. My name is Sonja Brodt, and I'll be your host today. I work with the UC Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program. And welcome to our webinar on using social networking to increase your impact in agricultural extension. So before we get started into the content, I want to just go over a few logistics and policy issues here. So we do want to inform everybody that we are recording this meeting today, and participants have the option to deny or approve the recording. And if you want to remain more private, you can turn off your video while still listening to the speakers. I also want to add that we will be having breakout sessions in the last approximately half an hour of the session today. We will not be recording those breakout sessions. So we want to be, have people feel comfortable in having open discussions. So those will not be recorded. As far as participating in the Zoom session today, as far as if you have questions for the presenters, please try to remember to put them in the Q&A instead of in the chat. That way we can more easily monitor them and keep track of what's been answered or whatnot. And then I can read the questions for the speakers to address. And please do keep yourself on mute all the time unless you're asked to speak so that we can keep the audio clear. And then you can use the chat for comments and discussions. Just remember, please do not ask questions specifically in the chat, as it just may get lost if there's a lot of discussion. We have a new policy on AI-powered services. So we do strive to host inclusive and accessible events that enable all individuals to engage fully. And so we recognize some people may be helped by using AI-powered services like note-taking and transcription services, such as Otter AI. So these are permitted during this webinar. However, the transcript or notes generated should be retained solely by yourself if you're using it, and make sure you have your settings set so that it is not automatically shared with other participants in this webinar today. Other AI meeting tools, such as facial expression and engagement analysis, are not permitted. And in accordance with university policy, once the notes have fulfilled their intended educational purpose, we ask that you destroy them to ensure compliance with data privacy guidelines. And that's up to your judgment when that would be. So we're going to do a little poll now just to find out what geographic regions we have covered today in our participants. Oh, there we go. Yeah, if you can fill out what region you primarily work in. We have a lot of statewide people, a lot of Central Valley people. Right.
Okay, I'll end the poll.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, so higher in the Central Valley, a lot of statewide people, Central and South Coast, there's a few. Okay, a few across the regions. We will later have breakout sessions based on these regions, and I'll review the instructions later, but if you're a statewide person, you can choose one of these regions to go in later to join. Okay. So let's continue on. So this webinar today is an activity of the California Farm Demonstration Network. And the concept for this network actually first got started many years ago by our cooperative extension colleague, Dr. Jeff Mitchell, but it was formalized in 2017 with a memorandum of understanding that was signed by the major agriculture serving institutions and agencies across the state. And so the main mission of the CFDN is for these entities to all collaborate together to establish a network of on-farm demonstration sites where farmers and ranchers can benefit from peer-to-peer learning and joint innovation to spread conservation farming practices and climate-smart agriculture. And so for the current 2-year period that we're in right now, our funding and the funding for this webinar is coming from a University of California Climate Action Research Grant, grant. And so the term networking comes up a lot on this slide. And I think it's actually essential to the functioning of the CFDN. Because we all as extension people have a lot of clientele we have to serve, right? So the Census of Agriculture in 2022 said that there's about 663,134 farms in California. And how many agricultural extension and outreach personnel are there? I don't really know if anybody's ever added that all up, but just in cooperative extension alone, it's only about 500 or so. And then I know we have about 95 RCDs and we have NRCS staff and we have a lot of nonprofits who serve agriculture, but still that number is not going to add up to anything near 63,000. And so we have to think of ways to amplify our work. And there's many different methods for doing that, many of which you probably use already. But I want to say for this webinar today that harnessing social networking that already occurs in the population you're serving is one important way of amplifying your work that should not be overlooked. And I also want to quickly say that while we may have a lot of expertise and are often hired for our expertise in topics like soil science and crop production, irrigation and hydrology, what we're fundamentally doing in this extension realm is things like dealing with behavior change and decision-making, communication and learning. And those are all processes and factors that have been studied a lot in the social sciences. And so I just want to remind us that we should be drawing from the social sciences for insights on how to effectively do our extension and outreach work. And so that's what we have an opportunity to do today in this webinar, is specifically having to do with one realm of social sciences, which is social network analysis. And we'll just be jumping a little bit into that just to give you a short taste of that, and then looking at ways that we can implement that in actual extension and outreach programs with our panelists today. And then after that, we'll be jumping into some breakout rooms to brainstorm on how does that apply to your specific work. And so with that, let me introduce the panelists. So we have Hope Zabronsky, who is an academic coordinator and program lead for UC-ANR's Climate Smart Agriculture program within the California Institute for Water Resources. Hope manages activities of the team's 10 technical assistance providers, and she provides on-farm assistance to producers in adopting soil health and water efficiency practices in Sacramento, Solano, and Yolo counties. Then we have Sara Tiffany, who is the director of ecological farming with the Community Alliance with Family Farmers, a statewide nonprofit. She and her team have been carrying out research and demonstration projects on pest management and soil health in collaboration with farmers for the last several years. And finally, I'm very happy that we have Elizabeth Black zooming in from Boulder, Colorado, where she is the producer and coordinator of the 10-year-long Citizen Science Soil Health Project. And she also operates a Christmas tree farm there with her husband, and also I know is a phenomenal artist in her own right. So with that, let me stop sharing and we'll turn it over to you, Hope.
Thank you, Sonja. And thank you all so much for joining us today. Really glad to see some familiar faces and also meet some new folks. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, can folks see the screen?
Looks good.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Well, again, thank you all so much for joining this webinar today. I am going to kind of focus on network smart extension and several tools for building stronger extension networks, kind of thinking about this idea of social network analysis and how it pertains to the really diverse extension systems that we support and are integrally kind of part of, across the state. So I wanted to start by sharing some background and kind of context with some research that I conducted as it pertains to network smart extension. And as part of my graduate research in collaboration with Lilongwe University, the government of Malawi, and UC Davis, we conducted a stakeholder analysis evaluating Malawi's extension networks as they relate to climate smart agricultural adoption. And through this research, we were able to identify that certain farmer-led organizations were really, really important to the sharing of information to local agricultural producers. But those organizations were often less connected from government and larger scale NGO extension providers. So we kind of were able to identify this gap that exists in the flow and the sharing of information for climate resilience in particular. And so I think this is really important because, what we were able to identify and kind of relating to this webinar, I think that really, a better understanding of how extension networks operate can help to identify potential gaps that might exist, but maybe even more importantly, key individuals or organizations who are deeply connected and embedded in particular extension communities. So as I'm going through a couple slides, I wanted to pose a couple questions for folks to think about. So first, how is agricultural knowledge shared or extended? Second, what is network smart extension? We're going to be talking about social network analysis and how to understand network relationships. And then finally, how can we actually build stronger extension networks and stronger extension systems? So we're going to be talking about a couple examples from research. So according to researchers, and this might seem, fairly basic, but I'll give some context as to why we're talking about it. But according to researchers, agricultural knowledge is extended through three primary learning pathways. So on the left-hand side, we have formal, then we have experiential, and then social learning. So formal knowledge is typically thought of in kind of a classroom style format, although it doesn't have to necessarily be inside it. It could be in an outdoor context as well. And usually the learner in this context is the receiver of information or knowledge. So oftentimes they might be listening to a presentation, but perhaps not as actively engaging, reflecting, or thinking about how this pertains to their area of focus. And then we have experiential learning, which is, learning by doing. So folks are actively problem solving, they're observing and kind of reflecting on what they're doing. And oftentimes this happens automatically in our brains, but different types of activities can facilitate this process where folks are really, thinking about how can they improve and build upon a particular practice or technology in an extension context. And then the third type of learning that we're really going to focus on today is social learning. So this is learning where we're actually building our networks. It's distributed amongst those in a particular community. And it might even go beyond just an individual and extend to a broader community One way to think about this is with communities of practice where folks in particular areas or particular communities are building and learning from one another. And it's more of a social network as opposed to an individual experience. So that kind of brings us to the idea of network smart extension, which essentially means utilizing extension network structures to really strengthen the relationships between individuals in order to improve information sharing in some type of extension network. And so the two kind of important goals of network smart extension are to first increase access to information that others in the extension system know. And then second, to really encourage individuals to also value what others know. So it's, seeing how you can build trust and relationships and not only improve the dissemination of knowledge, but facilitate relationships and networks that are based on trust and relationship development. So we can evaluate these network relationships by using social network analysis. And essentially, social network analysis is the mapping and measuring of relationships or the flows of information between people or organizations in some type of community. So this is the map that you see on the right-hand side, which I know looks pretty busy, but this is what a network map could potentially look like. And you see a lot of clusters of individuals. You see some dots. Those are individuals that are perhaps more connected within this particular network. And then you see some smaller dots, which perhaps are only connected to one or two other individuals in this extension network. So within an extension network, we have nodes, and every node is the person or independent organization in the network. So every single dot in this network map is a unique person. And then we have edges, which are essentially the links or the relationships between the nodes. And you can see those are basically the lines between each of the nodes. So those are kind of two terms that we'll talk about a little bit throughout this extension webinar, but it helps to start, thinking about what are the ways that people are connected, what are these networks actually look like, because every network is very unique. And then one of the important things to understand about this idea of network smart extension and social network analysis, there are different ways that we evaluate and understand these network relationships. And I put up on this slide two kind of, basic examples, but I thought it would be helpful to explain some of the concepts as you're thinking about social network analysis and who's kind of within a network. So on the left-hand side, network A, we have 5 nodes. So those are the purple dots. And you can see that the node in the center is really, really important because that node is connecting the 4 other nodes to one another. So if that node were to disappear, or perhaps that individual becomes really busy, those individuals can't necessarily share information as readily, as smoothly, because there potentially could be a break in that portion of the network. So that's really one important thing to notice. And then the number of times that a node is situated between 2 other nodes within a network is also really important because we can see who is holding the network together, the shortest distance between all of the nodes in the network. So thinking about, measures of reach, who is on the edge of the network, who is at the core or the center of the network, and how can information be easily disseminated or dispersed within a particular network. So we have a very small and kind of clustered network on the left-hand side with one very key node. And then on the right-hand side, network B, you can see that every node is just as connected to one another. So this is considered a very strong network, although it's small, because if one node were to disappear in this network, the two other nodes would still be just as connected to one another. So there wouldn't necessarily be a break in knowledge sharing or relationships, because you can see that every node is just as connected to one another. So that's kind of important to think about when we're considering structure, because it does pertain to oftentimes who has access to information and how readily they can share that with other folks in their community. And then I did want to briefly talk about several different evaluation tools that can help us understand who operates within a network. As folks are probably aware, there are some, fairly common tools like surveys, interviews, focus groups, and even needs assessments that can be used within social network analysis to understand who are these nodes and what do these structures actually look like. And then I just included a couple key questions to be thinking about if you are interested in kind of evaluating the nodes within your network. So I won't read all of them, but some key questions would be, who or what is your primary source of information? What outreach methods allow you to build relationships with those in your network? And then who might be missing from your network and why? So I wanted to kind of end by sharing two real-world examples of network smart extension strategies. On the left-hand side, we have a research project that was led by Dr. Hoffman and colleagues who used network smart extension strategies to identify extension networks in wine grape growers in a couple different regions of California. And this research was able to help identify information resources that were most valuable to farmers in the extension network. And what they found, which was really interesting, that the most important role that an extension provider could play in this network was not necessarily in sharing research or new technologies with farmers, but actually instead acting as a knowledge broker, connecting growers and facilitating network events where folks could actually learn from one another. So getting back to that idea of social learning. And then on the right-hand side, a UC Davis Vet Med project used Network Smart Extension to share poultry health information with producers and partners in order to disseminate some really timely information about poultry diseases. And their knowledge of the local poultry networks helped to actually identify and engage those who are well poised to further spread science-based knowledge within the extension community. So they didn't necessarily have to contact everybody in order to disseminate this information, but a couple key individuals who were really well embedded into the network. So I will end by saying I'm not necessarily an expert on network smart extension, but I have seen how it can be used to strengthen extension relationships, while also improving collective knowledge within agricultural communities. So I would love to answer questions that folks have. Sonja, if we have a couple minutes, I would be happy to answer some questions from folks. Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds good. Anybody have a question? Actually, I'm also putting, there's a better link. I'm putting into the chat the link to that Hoffman et al. Article that Hope was drawing from right now. That's really a worthwhile read in California agriculture. All right, any immediate questions for Hope? Now's your chance. Otherwise, we can move on. Okay, here's one from Jim Farrar. If I'm a new advisor in a region, how can I figure out the social network?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think, as part of the new advisor kind of process coming into A&R, and other organizations might do kind of similar things to conduct a needs assessment. I think starting by asking some of these basic questions to key informants that you might know in the extension network, and then, kind of building off of those key informants to identify other folks that could provide, really helpful information about who operates within the network. I oftentimes start with a survey and then move into select interviews or focus groups. But I think even starting with a basic stakeholder analysis / needs assessment is a really good place to start. And you often find that folks have other individuals who you should talk to, and then it can kind of snowball from there in terms of, who can help to identify those within your extension network.
Excellent. And Becky is asking, do you have any software recommendations to visualize networks and identify key nodes?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are lots of more quantitative software packages out there. Personally, I have used NVivo for qualitative analysis coding. So that was through interviews. And then I actually exported network relationships to a free open source data visualization software called Gephi. I can post the link to that software in the chat, but it's really fantastic for social network analysis, and it's a free open access software.
Great. Wow, thanks a lot, Hope. And yeah, it'd be great if you could post that link. So good. I think we're ready to move on to Sara from CAFF.
All right, can everybody see that?
Looks good.
All right, I'm gonna set a timer for myself. So hi everyone, my name is Sarah Tiffany and I work with Community Alliance of Family Farmers. And for those of you who aren't familiar with CAFF, I'll say that we do a lot of different farmer facing programs. I personally work on the ecological farming team at CAFF. And it really stands on the shoulders, I'll say, of many decades of various CAFF programs that have really worked on the ground with farmers. And so we've been able to learn a lot over the years. I'm just going to share a couple key things of how I think our network smart extension kind of manifests on the ground, and some things we've learned. First of all, just in terms of like why we care about this at CAFF, it really comes to the way that we administer our programming and services are kind of in 4 different buckets. We conduct on-farm research and demonstration projects. We do a lot of farmer-to-farmer field days and also webinars. We do one-on-one technical assistance. And we also develop resources that we like to be based in both science and farmer experience. And when I was sort of thinking about this, I realized the reason this is so important is that every single one of these elements requires relationships with farmers. It requires participation, it requires input or collaboration. And I can also add that these also require relationships with many of you, right? Folks in UC Cooperative Extension, RCDs, other nonprofits. So it's really core to what we do. I wanted to talk through a couple kind of key examples of how this is played out in our work. So first of all, I wanted to add this little slide here. I'll go through it briefly, in part because I know part of what CFDN is trying to do is establish new sort of hubs, and a lot of those folks are trying to establish new demonstration projects in areas where maybe you haven't had any. So I just wanted to share some of how we do that at CAFF when we start a new project, maybe even in a new area where we don't have existing farmers in mind, for example, of who we want to partner with, or we don't really have a network fully set up yet. I wanted to mention that we really lean on our advisory committee, and or for certain projects, like really starting with the BIOS work in the 90s, the biologically integrated orchard systems, we established these management teams, which is a combination of farmers that we have good relationships with, maybe going back many years with the organization in general, extension folks, and also consultants. Right now, last several years, we have a number of IPM projects going, and we actively engage with PCAs as part of that process. And also just talking to farmers you already know and trust, asking for recommendations of, we're looking for farms that would be interested in a project around cover cropping or around natural enemy release or whatever it may be. Try to get some good recommendations, and obviously leaning on the connections we have within the extension and technical assistance community more broadly, especially on a regional level. And this could be a whole topic in itself for those of you that are familiar with doing on-farm work. But I want to name a couple things because it really relates to the question of how we find farmers and really build out networks. So for us, a lot of it starts with finding really good on-farm research and demonstration partners. And there's obviously sort of the scientific protocol for trying to find folks that are a good fit. I'm not going to talk about that. What I wanted to mention was that we've learned over the years that, especially because of the constantly evolving kind of challenges that farmers are under, it's really important for these sites to be a good fit for what we're trying to do. And essentially what we're trying to do is build these networks, extend this knowledge, increase more and more access to information and knowledge sharing among growers. So first, we want them obviously to be on board with the goals of the project or the research questions or whatever it may be. We want them to be interested in co-learning with us as we're collecting data, so that it can be a very collaborative process. And the third one I put down here, which I think we've learned is the most important, is that those farms that are hosting on-farm research and demonstration sites are interested in sharing their experience with other growers. Either the experience of the particular research that we're doing, or just more generally what they've learned about different practices, and that they're generally interested in this farmer to farmer knowledge exchange approach and just community building in general. So just a tip for any of you that are kind of in this process. To kind of give an example, let's say we've set up our demonstration project, and we have, in the case of what we're doing right now, we have 8 different demonstration farms. You just added a layer of that many farmers to your existing network around a given topic, right? And so for us, really the next step is to host these farm-to-farmer field days. And when we're starting out, we often will lean on those same grower partners to host. And these are just a couple of highlights about how we do that. We want to know what the farmers themselves want to talk about. So obviously we'll talk some about the project, but do they have speakers in mind? Do they have other farmers they would like to, sort of tag team on a presentation with? We really want to design it so it's a farmer-centered event. Research is part of the discussion, but not the driver. That's been an important lesson for us. And these 2 points are really the ones I'm going to dig into. Having farmer-centered conversations with lots of time for discussion, participation from other growers, and unstructured networking time. So this is where I'm going to say that, I think sometimes when we think about field days or extension events, we think of it as we do this event and then it's done. We've checked the box. But really what I would propose is those extension events are really one of the core strategies for building and extending a network. So for example, one of the things that we kind of try to keep an ear to the ground during these field days is, who are the folks that are sharing a lot? Are they sharing that they themselves are experimenting with things? Are they asking lots of questions? Are there repeat customers? Are we getting folks that are coming to field days and again? And what I would recommend is really being proactive, going and talking to those folks, introducing yourself, seeing what they're doing, where they're based, et cetera, and starting that relationship. And through those field days, you can build another layer in your network, right? And then for folks that you really connected with, and maybe they asked a question or they requested some information, make sure you follow up with them. I mean, consider every attendee at a field day a person that is then part of your network, and you can build from there. So follow up with people, be a liaison to other TA providers and extension personnel. Ask growers if they're open to connecting with other growers. This isn't appropriate for everyone. You kind of have to feel it out based on what you've learned in that relationship. And as time goes on, ask for input from growers on, the topics that you're working on, either with field days or research, et cetera, to really create that kind of back and forth, give and take relationship. And that's all I have. So I'm happy to take questions. But again, I just wanted to really emphasize that when we have these events, it allows us to really build and tend our networks. And one thing I'll add is that from there, that's often how we then follow up with technical assistance, right? Because we have like a base layer of a relationship where people feel comfortable asking questions and whatnot. And I'll stop there. I also want to note that Hannah Call is here with CAFF, who is really the person that is executing this work on the ground right now. So shout out to Hannah.
Yes, thank you, Sara and Hannah. Any questions for Sara?
I have some questions, Sara, if there's time.
Go ahead.
Just things that I think we've learned from our work that I think it would be helpful to share. And also we've had some conversations about it, but you mentioned about building relationships with partners. What are some good strategies of keeping those relationships helpful, mutually beneficial, and ultimately the most beneficial for farmers and for building a network?
Yeah, I think that's a great question / point. I think that, CAFF is in an interesting position, right? Because we're a statewide nonprofit. We're obviously somewhat limited by where our staff is in geography. But we've really tried to, establish relationships with the extension and TA people in the areas that we work in. And that can look different ways. Sometimes there's informal meetings. For those of you that maybe remember, we had a Sac Valley TA hub that started very organically and informally as just those of us working with farmers in the Sacramento Valley wanting to get together on a quarterly basis and just share what's going on. I think it's always great to ask if you know, it would be appropriate to share events and different learning or TA opportunities through other people's networks. So get even among us folks that are working with farmers, having a flow of information. The other thing I would say, and going back to an earlier question that Hope answered too, is go to other people's events is really nice. I mean, I think we want to be conscious of not having the sort of population of attendees be a little too heavy on the extension and technical assistance provider side. But it's a great way to meet people. It's a great way to connect with what other people are working on and just be part of the network in general. I don't know if you would add anything, Hannah, or anybody else for that matter.
Yeah, I think one thing we've talked about is really recently is communication of what working with networks of farmers look like with partners, and communicating how that looks for CAFF and how that might look for different partners. And so that's something that I think is a very active discussion, but we've started to try to think about lately.
Yeah, I might add a layer to that, which I think maybe you're referring to, but noting like which communities, which extension and TA provider offices are working with, right? So CAFF is maybe a little unique in that a lot of our focus does go to smaller scale farms, not exclusively. But oftentimes, you know, our colleagues in UC Cooperative Extension or RCDs are working more at the mid and larger scale. And so by being more collaborative, we can have this nice complementary larger network so that, you know, our work can get to some of those bigger growers and vice versa, right?
Yeah, okay. And Jim asked, and this will be the last question before we move on, but he asked if you found any differences between small farmers and large farmers, PCAs and farmers, and PCAs and other crop consultants in terms of like social networks and field days.
Yes, it's the short answer. We've definitely found differences, and I won't go down a rabbit hole, but I think what it can come down to is knowing your audience, knowing that, you know, we all know here that farmers are not a monolith, right? So part of developing those relationships with farmers and even building this into field days is asking people what their needs and interests are, rather than assuming because this other group of farmers that you work with in a different area was interested and concerned about these things, right? So I think that's where like the give and take part of the relationship is so important. But yeah, I mean, it's smaller scale farmers typically don't have a lot of the resources out there aren't necessarily made for their particular scale, for example. So oftentimes there's a gap in knowledge or access to resources. There's lots of gaps in access to funding. And oftentimes, you know, and this can happen at mid and larger scales, but oftentimes smaller scale farms are a lot more diversified. And so you know, whether you're working on soil health or pest management, the things that the questions you get are often maybe more dynamic or complicated or less clear in terms of what an obvious answer is, and recognizing that all farms are dynamic and complicated, but I don't know, those are a few things I would share. And yeah, on the note about PCAs, I think, you know, just being inclusive, I would say is a lesson we've learned there. It's really helpful to be inclusive when we have these conversations. And when we're talking about things like pest management, right? Like if we're working with mid-scale growers and we're not including their PCs in the conversation, I think the likelihood of adoption and success goes way down. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually those PCAs and CCAs are often key nodes in these networks and circulate to so many different farmers, right? So, all right, thank you so much, Sarah. Appreciate it. Let's move on to Elizabeth Black joining us from Colorado. There we go.
Okay. So, yeah, so I'm Elizabeth Black. I run the Citizen Science Soil Health Project. Next slide, please. Right. So our project is with 50 Boulder, Weld, and Larimer County growers. They're on the Front Range of Colorado on the Eastern Plains, just north of Denver. It's a really diverse group of growers. We've got organic veg growers, conventional commodities, ranchers with both dryland and irrigated pasture, several home gardens, open space, grassland and forests, and a couple golf courses. And we offer all our growers a free annual soil health test every year for 10 years. We use the Haney and the PLFA soil health test. Next slide. So the example on the left side of the screen shows how we give the results to our growers. We have taken the Haney test and added color coding to it and a lot of explanations in normal ranges. So it's more understandable. We sort of copied the Cornell cash test format for this. And then on the right side of the screen shows the year-end report we give to our growers, which shows them how they stack up compared to other growers in their group. So this grower can, his results are in the center part of the screen, and he can see that he's somewhere in the middle compared to his peers. Next slide. We also give our put together our annual findings about the soils that we test in our project. This is from the first year of our study, and you can see that in Colorado we have pretty alkaline soil, and that it definitely has an effect on soil health. Next slide. So we're funded by we've been funded by a couple grants from Western SARE for the last 6 years. And then we've been able to accumulate enough funds to pay for the following 4 years of our project. Next slide. So our philosophy has been that our growers have the answers, and it's how to get them to share those answers and figure out how to improve soil health in Colorado. Colorado is pretty different than California. We have some challenges that you don't have. We only get 16 inches of annual precip. We have shallow, poor, and alkaline soils, a short growing season, high elevation, and rapid urban development, which is gobbling up water resources and some of the best soils in our state. Next slide. Our project has some structural advantages that perhaps you don't have when you're trying to put together a group with extension. We have a stable group of 50 growers that pretty much has stayed the same over the last 6 years. Our growers have agreed to share their contact information for each other, and I make sure that they get their updated contact sheet every year. We have lots of time. We have 10 years in this project, so it's lots of time for people to get to know each other. And the other advantage is that I'm old. I'm not going anywhere. I've lived here for a long time. I'm not an ambitious young person who's going to be leaving for a better job in 3 years. I'm also not with the government. And so that means that I can say things that government people can't say, and I can be irreverent, and I can leaven things with humor in ways that perhaps government folks can't. Next slide. So we've done a whole lot of different things, tried all sorts of different activities and speakers and all different kinds of things to help our growers figure out how to improve their soil health. And this year we asked them what had been the most successful and least successful activities. And this is how it ranked from 1 down to 17. Down at the bottom are things like our first farm field day, which was not very helpful according to them. We had folks bury underwear. That wasn't very helpful. And we had outside speakers. Those didn't rank very high. The things that ranked pretty high were the things that I've already told you about that we do. And then basically talking to other growers. The things that are highlighted in red here are the more social networking things that we've done. Next slide. So one of the highest social networking things that our growers ranked was we get our, as I've gone around and talked to our growers, certain people are doing pretty interesting things. And so we have several growers each year at our annual meeting talk about what they're doing to improve their soil health, what their strategies are. And these are really informal talks. These guys aren't used to talking in front of a lot of people, but generally the audience of other growers has been extremely kind to them. And they've been able to share their soil health strategies. And our growers really have found this useful. Then I have made crummy videos of them talking with my little video camera and Movie Maker. And I insert the slides that they give me into Movie Maker and put it all together and put these videos up on YouTube. And those also have ranked pretty highly, even though they're not professional videos. Next slide. The other thing that ranks equally high by our growers is socializing with other growers. If you think about it, these guys are alone a whole lot of the time, sitting on a tractor, putting up hay, spraying things, working in their fields. And so getting together with other people, they really appreciate. You know, when we have these kinds of meetings and are trying to disseminate information, it's, you know, we know our growers are really busy and have limited time. And so we try to cram as much information as we can into our meetings. And it's really hard to prioritize carving out the time for socializing, but that socializing time is really important for our growers, I think, and for the sharing of information. Next slide. So I threw this slide in. This is the way that we had been setting up our room for our annual meetings for the last few meetings, with the speaker, the guy in the red shirt, up on the left, and he's talking to everybody and they're all sitting at their tables looking at him. So this last year, what we did is we turned the tables at right angles, so that and we had people sitting at both sides of the table, and they had to turn their chairs to look at the speakers. But they also were facing each other, and we had a whole lot of more interaction between people when we did it that way. And it really, really helped kind of bring a lot more energy to the meeting and to the room. Next slide. So we've tried other things to get interactions going between our growers. One of the things, we do a lot of introduction games and stuff. One year we had people divide into pairs and interview each other, and then they would have to introduce the other person in their pair. We've had people, when they introduce themselves, talk about their water challenges or their experience with cover crops or compost. We've also done some small group exercises. At the beginning of our project, we had to make sure all our growers knew how to find their GPS coordinates on their phone. Some of them knew how to do it and some of them didn't. And so we had them find someone else. The guys who didn't know how to do it, had them find someone else who knew how to do it and have that other grower teach them how to find their GPS coordinates on their phone. We've also divided into small groups to score soil pits, practice interpreting Haney and PLFA test results. Next slide. And then we try to always include sharing food and drink and having potluck food if at all possible as part of our annual meetings. When you share food with someone else, when you bring food for someone else, when you eat food that someone else has brought for you, there's a connection that's made. And I think it's easy to discount that, but I think it's an important connection that helps to forge bonds. Next slide. So this last slide is what I thought was perhaps a missed engagement opportunity. This was our second farm field day, which was much more successful. This last year, we visited 2 separate farms and dug soil pits, but it was 97 degrees all afternoon. And so people were a little fried. This was after dinner, and we did this slake test. And the results were very surprising. We actually did not expect the cornfield to do as badly as it did because it had aftermath grazing, no really reduced tillage. And so this was a big surprise. And you can see people are really looking at this hard and are pretty engaged, but there was not a lot of give and take going on. So it would have been good to do something like started the discussion beforehand about what people thought was going to happen. We could have structured some kind of game where we gave people monopoly money to place bets on which one was going to do the worst or which one was going to do the best. Something to try and get people a little more engaged and then a little more clued into what the outcome actually was. So that's it. Next slide. Anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Elizabeth. Just that effect of turning the tables and making people look at each other and the impact that was such an interesting observation, something that bears repeating. Anybody has a quick question? Yeah, I know.
I have a question. You mentioned that you did different intro games and activities as part of the event, kind of like icebreakers and kind of activities. What out of those were most well received? Like what kind?
Well, I don't know that any of them were particularly well received, but over the years, they've gotten used to me. Okay, I'm old. I can be dorky. This is dorky. Okay, here she goes again with the dorky introduction games. I guess we'll do it again, kind of thing. So, yeah, it just, yeah, you just have to be a dork.
So there was like an increase in getting used to them and maybe even kind of liking them over time, or?
Well, just, okay, this is just what we have to do, Here she goes again. Yeah. That's what I think. I haven't asked them, but that's sort of my impression.
Being brave enough to be dorky, that's a requirement for extension professionals, I guess.
Yeah.
I wanted to, before we go into the breakout rooms, I wanted to pose one question. And I know, Sara, you have talked about this in the past, if you have any thoughts to share right now, but and I think the dorkiness comment kind of brings this on too, is that when we do more network smart activities and run our events that way, there's kind of a loss of control a little bit, right, of how it all is going. And I know also there's kind of related to that an issue of like, how do we ensure the scientific integrity of information that gets passed around when other people are passing it around to other people and it's not all coming from you as like this science trained person. And you had some interesting thoughts about how having the right people at your event really helps, you know, create the ecosystem that you want.
Yeah, I can comment on that. So what I'll say first is, just to note that there's, there's a lot of amazing applied research that can inform how we understand best practices, et cetera. But it does not come close to covering every situation, every environmental condition when it comes to a practice, every grower priority. And so like the growers themselves, just by way of them actually practicing agriculture, have so much to contribute. And I think it is a very healthy and can be challenging to kind of like let go of control, right? And that's why I mentioned earlier, like research is part of the conversation, but it's not the driver. And yeah, and sometimes conversations can go in ways that you didn't anticipate. What I can say first is that, going back to this idea, if you're having a field day at a farm where you either have an ongoing on-farm research project going, you probably know that farmer well, you probably really trust and are aligned with how they share information. So like that's already a person that you feel good about having in that circle. Similarly, if you're, when we partner with farmers to host field days that we're not necessarily doing a on-farm demo project with, part of kind of sussing out whether it makes sense for them to host is our comfort level with kind of like where they're coming from. And in most of the time, it's really good. But once in a while, you do have folks that you get a little worried, like, well, we'd love for this person to be part of the discussion, but given where they take the discussion, sometimes maybe they don't have the main platform. So I think that's some kind of critical thinking around who's hosting. And the other thing I would say is to, I think as you build these networks over time, you're going to have growers and extension professionals and PCAs attend that are well respected within the group. And so you kind of evolve to where you have a little bit of a self-selecting type of group. And so, even though you're kind of like creating a lot of space in the agenda for the conversation to go where it's going to go, by the nature of who is showing up I'll say in majority, you can usually anticipate that any questions or maybe problematic suggestions will usually get kind of they'll get balanced out by that sort of like majority of people that are, either, they're well-respected growers or PCAs or folks you kind of already know where they're going to be coming from. There's a level of confidence I think you can reach in a group dynamic without having control over the content that's shared, if that makes sense. And the other thing I would say, and this is an ongoing learning experience, is just like training ourselves in facilitation, so that if you do need to step in and kind of like reframe a conversation or maybe take it back to the original question, you can do that in a way that isn't overly disruptive to the feeling we're trying to create, which is a very inclusive, like everyone is welcome to share feeling, but we are here to generally talk about these things, So hopefully that answers your question to some degree.
Yeah, thank you. if anybody else wants to comment on that at all. Otherwise, we can start moving to the breakout rooms.
I guess my comment, it's sort of coming from a different place, but is that if someone brings up something that is kind of out of where you're going or challenging, I view that as more of a an opportunity because generally they're the brave person that is saying it, and a number of other people are the ones that are thinking it too.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Elizabeth. Yeah, exactly. Somebody speaking up is not necessarily the only person thinking that.
Can I make one more comment, Sonja?
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think yes, and sometimes I guess very off topic. If, we work with a lot of, conventional growers and folks coming from different, if things get political, or if they go towards, the rabbit hole of regulation, I think, yeah, like recognizing, oh, there's clearly a concern there, but like, do we need to go down this specific rabbit hole? Like how to like weave it in so it stays relevant to the group, I guess. But yeah, I appreciate you saying, I mean, I think that's part of the joy of it, is it's a much more creative process because you don't know what people are going to share. And so you actually learn a lot more, I think.
Yeah, that's such a different way to look at it, Sarah, like that, turning it around. All right. We're going to take a few minutes, given the time, maybe about, I don't know, Marietta, can we make the breakout rooms like 12 minutes, 11 or 12 minutes long? We're going to give you a chance to just really think about the networks that you engage with amongst your clientele. And so there's going to be just 2 questions to discuss. And we're doing this by region, so choose the region that makes the most sense for you. But it's the questions include, can you think of individuals that serve as nodes in your clientele's networks? So those who share a lot of information with each other or are the go-to people for other people's questions. And you don't necessarily have to share names or anything, but just think about the characteristics of those individuals and how do you identify those individuals. And then just think about and discuss a little bit, what are some of the techniques you would use in your extension activities? And it doesn't have to just be in-person events, but other things you do throughout your programming that can help to build more networking opportunities for your clientele. And those questions are in the chat now. So let's all, if you go to the right side, you can, on the bottom of your screen, you could pull up the 3 dots and there's breakout rooms. Yeah,
The
there's
breakouts
4
room are
breakout
open.
rooms. Right, the breakout rooms are open according to the 4 regions. So if you're not in a particular region, please just choose one that makes the most sense to you. And we'll be back in about 11 minutes or so. All right, looks like we're all back. I know, I figured we would lose people along the way. Did anybody have any especially interesting insights that came out of your group discussion that you don't mind sharing? Yeah, Jill.
I apologize. I actually started late on the workshop, so I can't wait to see what the recording is. But what we discussed in mine is I'm relatively new. I'm a CES. My position locally, I actually split my time between a statewide. Locally, this position is completely new. And so it's been interesting as a CES to try to get your ground when you're not necessarily given that, I don't know what the word is, lack of a better authority or whatever, to do a needs assessment, get something going. So I have been struggling. I've been spinning my wheels a little bit, and I'm supposed to be focusing on like food waste reduction in ag, but nobody in my, in my site does that particularly. So it's just interesting. I mean, I'm getting support now and I'm figuring it out, but just to share that, it's like hard when you're first year, and it's kind of difficult when you are a CES to figure out your role if you're not pushed into something that already exists.
Yeah, that needs assessment piece is definitely critical when you're in your situation. And yeah, I would just definitely encourage you to think about needs assessment, not just in terms of the topical area, but also how people network together and how you can utilize that to your advantage. Any other particular thoughts anybody wants to share?
I can share a little bit of what our group talked about. We had a small but mighty group, Sara, Vong, and I. And one of the, I think, really interesting things we talked about was, in certain regions, there are really well-established grower networks for particular topics, or it might even be by region or for, particular commodity. But what happens when those networks don't exist? And, what role do we play as technical assistance providers in helping to facilitate networks and facilitate relationships with growers where they might not previously exist? So I don't know that we maybe have an answer for that, but that was kind of an interesting conversation because those networks might not exist to the extent they do so in regions like the Cape Valley or the North Coast. And how do we facilitate those in a way that still recognizes people's autonomy and, also ensures that we're, as technical assistance providers, not necessarily, the facilitator of those relationships. Sara and Vong, I don't know if there's anything else you all wanted to add.
Yeah, I like your comment, Sara, about just going to other events where farmers may be found, even if it's unrelated to your topic. So that's good. Yeah, it sounds like sometimes you have to start with a small nucleus and then maybe build the network from there. But if there's two farmers who are interested in something, build on that and then follow up with their relationships. All right. Well, we're at time now, and we'll be mailing out this evaluation link, but if you want to do it right now to get it done with, that would be great. I also want to say there's a link at the end of the survey where you can go to somewhere to add your name and email if you want to be part of just be on a list for more information about participatory extension and network smart extension kinds of topics in the future. We're not sure yet what we're doing with that list, except, notifying you about more events like this at the moment, but you can do that. So look for that at the end of the evaluation if you're interested. But I want to thank the speakers today, the panelists. You were all really fantastic. A lot of great insights. I really appreciate it. And we've lost some people here, but I thank everybody who came at some point or the other. And we'll be letting you know about the recording and everything that's available, and we'll be able to share that with other people as well. So thank you, everybody.